Howdy, y'alls. It's me, Dr. Edwards, again. This time back to offer some more insights and kind of inside perspectives about some of our key anthropological concepts that you read about this week. So, what is anthropology? Well, put it simply, anthropology is the study of humanity and all of its glorious shapes and forms. You can break down the etymology of the word anthropo and logia. Anthropo is humanity, and logia is study of, from ancient Greek. So that's kind of the roots of the term. But I like to highlight anthropology as the study of humanity, that any and everything that humans have done, and even pre-humans, right? When we talk about hominids, ancient human ancestors, all of that, all of that is anthropology. And let's see here, we have various subfields. The main subfields, we often describe anthropology as having a four field approach, or a four subdiscipline approach. We have cultural anthropology, we have archaeology, we have biological and physical anthropology, and we have linguistics. So, four key subdisciplines. Now, over the past 20, 30 years or so, there's a new one that's coming on. And some people consider it a fifth subdiscipline, some people consider it the separate thing. Whatever way you want to argue it, it's still an important thing to include, and it is called applied anthropology. So, let me give you a quick little breakdown about each of those. Cultural anthropology is the study of all things cultural. All right, this culture is this thing that surrounds everything, and it's a lens through which we interpret the world around us. From the mug that I'm drinking from, why is it the shape? Why are these images on it? The symbolism of those things. Literally, why am I sitting behind a computer talking to you all? All right, that's culture. All right, food, political organization, marriage patterns, language, all of this, right, falls under cultural anthropology. Let's see here, archaeology. This is the study of material remains from past societies. All right. It's a lot more than just finding stuff in the dirt, but that's a nice way to start thinking about it. There are all sorts of things that you can look for, from artifacts to features to cultural landscapes. These this really gives insight into past human societies. All right, but actually, strike that. But I'll get to this point here in a second. Next up, physical and biological. This is kind of, think forensics. If you've ever seen the show Bones, all right, she's a forensic anthropologist, and forensic anthropologists have to have an intimate understanding of biology, morphology, physiology, everything to do about why our body is the way it is. All right, you can look for signs of disease in bones. It also extends all the way to ancient hominids. Let's see here, like Louis Leakey, Richard Leakey, and studying Australopithecines, ancient hominids. And that also includes some archaeological techniques. I mean, when you're excavating such ancient human remains, hominid remains. What else was there? Cultural, archaeological, biophysical, linguistic, study of languages, how languages come to be, how they change. I like to say that language is culture, culture is language. It's literally, if you speak a second language, you have a good idea what I'm talking about. How we express and hear things are very culturally constructed, right? And the way you might express yourself in one language is different than the way you might express yourself in another language. So yeah, this linguistics is the study of language broadly. Um, you know, kind of a contemporary cool thing that you can look at from a linguistic anthropological perspective is the emoji language, if you would. This has really come on strong in the past, 10, 15 years or so, and now it's literally its own language. People text just emojis, right? And unless you have an inside cultural understanding of what that emoji means, you're at a loss. Culture is language, language is culture. Yeah. Applied anthropology. Now, this is what I love. Doing research is great and wonderful. It's great to explore things that interest you. Applied anthropology is using anthropological insights and understandings to solve real world problems. All right. We study people. We understand people. This makes us particularly well suited to addressing people problems, right, or issues. Don't want to suggest that people have problems like that. That's rather negative. But everyone everywhere is constantly adapting and changing and trying to find their way in the world. How you feed yourself, how you put food on the table. Yeah. I work extensively in international development and conservation. I kind of serve as a cultural translator between local communities and these outside agencies and institutions that come in to try to do development work or conservation work. And I use my inside understanding of particular peoples and places and practices and values to help orient the outside development groups, right? Because they don't have that intimate insight, and this is usually something that you develop over many years in a particular place. I work extensively in West Africa, particularly Mali. I speak several of the languages, and so that makes me well suited to kind of serving as a cultural interpreter. I also use my insights to help with policy development and conservation. Anyway, I can go on forever about that, but I just try to give you quick little snapshots here. Perspectives. This is another key thing brought up in this week's readings. We got three major perspectives that we talk about. We got holistic, relativistic, and comparative. Okay? Now, a holistic perspective is really talking about looking at things from multiple angles. Think of the four subdisciplines, or fifth if you include applied anthropology. Each of those kind of represents a unique lens or view onto humanity. So if you're looking at things from multiple subfields, you are really kind of having a holistic perspective. You're looking at things from more than one angle. All right. Relativistic or relative perspective. Think cultural relativism. This is where you are trying to understand things from the local perspective. What is it to them and why? This is, we often talk about an emic perspective, which means an inside perspective. And this is where, through field work, you often gain real intimate understanding. It doesn't mean that you necessarily agree or believe in those things, but to have an inside emic understanding of them is really focused on a relativistic perspective. What is it to them? Why do they do it that way? I think earlier I mentioned Franz Boas and historical particularism and how that's evolved into what we call cultural relativism today. This concept of relativism is central to anthropology as a result. Comparative. Now, this is really useful for comparing things. You got to be careful to still, apply cultural relativism because you don't want to suggest one group is better than another group. But you can compare groups, not to size them up, but just to see what's different. All right. Pick a general theme like politics. political organization, how people organize themselves and distribute power. Uh, some groups may be very egalitarian. Power doesn't rest in a single individual or a single, rank or anything like that. It's diffused. It's shared. Versus, say, like an industrialized state type society where you're going to have social stratification. You know, certain people are going to have access to certain rights and privileges that others will not have access to. Right. So that's just a quick real example of showing how you can compare one group or how one group structures their political organization compared to another group and how they structure their political organization. And again, I stress, it's not to determine which is better. You may have your personal feelings on that. That's great, right? But don't let a comparative approach or comparative perspective suggest to you that it's okay to judge. All right, that's what we want to avoid. So keep your cultural relativism in play. And, think about just difference, all right? And difference doesn't mean bad or good. It just means different, right? To really throw a spin on this, you can actually use all three perspectives, holistic, relative, and comparative. And that also gives you a really nice kind of holistic approach, looking at things from multiple angles. Let's see here. Some other key things brought up in this week's readings. Ethnographic fieldwork. All right, this is what cultural anthropologists do. This is our primary focus here in this course. Ethnography is a study of a group, and you may have a particular focus. For me, my primary research interests are centered around wildlife use, right? So I actually wrote an ethnography about wildlife use in Mali, West Africa. How and why people use wildlife the way they do, right? It was ridiculously fat, my dissertation. Ethnography is, you have to go and do. Remember Malinowski and going and doing field work, doing some participant observation. That's living and working with the community, not just sitting there observing, but actually participating. All right. How else are you going to get a good understanding of something unless you actually do it? All right. And that doesn't mean you just go bulldozing into a community and say, oh yeah, I want to do this, and this. Now, don't go there. Giving an example, in my field work in West Africa, I work extensively with traditional hunters. And I don't demand that hunters take me out. I ask, and some do, some don't. But when I get to go out, that's participant observation. That is going out, observing and feeling what's going on. It's incredibly valuable. All right. Mapping. Mapping. All sorts of mapping techniques, from literally drawing out, the spatial distributions of people, where they're located in the topography, the geography. There's all sorts of mapping. Let's see, one practice that I use with the traditional hunters that I work with, I ask them to draw their territories where they hunt. All right, and so each hunter draws out their idea of their space and where they do things and where things are found. And what's really cool is if you get a bunch of people to do that, you ask politely, you can see some really interesting things. You can use those various perspectives, all right, to see differences and commonalities between them. And between all that may give you some insights into how people see their environment, right? From the social environment to the physical environment. It's really cool, fun stuff. Interviews. Interviews are really important when you're doing field work. Participant observation is important. Mapping, you can have surveys where you ask people, standardized questions. But what I find really useful is sitting down and having an intimate um, conversation with someone or several people, all right, about a particular thing. Now, this may be really impromptu. You might be like, you see something and you're like, oh, hey, what's with that? Why does that happen that way? And next thing you know, you're sitting there having a conversation about the whole thing. That's an example of an interview, right? A very impromptu one, but still qualifies. Sometimes you might sit down and have what we call a semi-structured interview, where you have kind of key topics that you want to chat with somebody about and gain insight. But you kind of move with the conversation. All right. So you might find like they bring something up and you're like, oh, hey, wow, I'd never even considered that. Tell me more about that. And you see how it just kind of moves from one to another. It's organic. It's fluid. Now, the key thing is after that conversation, you got to find some space to write it all up. Right. And of course, you need to have the informed consent of the folks that you work with to do so. Another thing about field work that's brought up in our readings this week is kind of qualitative versus quantitative. Well, qualitative is really looking at kind of the more, how to put it, the social stuff, how people conceive and understand of things. Those aren't things that you can put numbers on. You might, tally up so many people have this perspective, and that would be quantitative, right? But the details of what that perspective is, all right, that would be qualitative, right? So lots of folks in their field work, ethnographic field work, they tend to be very qualitative. I use a combination. I use qualitative and quantitative. I work in markets that sell wildlife in various forms, and so I'm counting the beans, if you would. I count how many types of critters are used for whatever and where they come from, and so all that's really quantitative. But I also really I focus extensively on qualitative as well, because numbers are great, but unless you have insight into why those numbers exist in the first place, right? It's kind of hollow data. So I use a combination, qualitative and quantitative. I believe it gives a much more kind of nuanced understanding of the things that anthropologists study. All right, that's where I'm going to leave this video. Well, sorry, it's a bit longer than I realized. And yeah, I'll probably make another one here for some other aspects of this week. See you then. Bye.